Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for another video. So today's video is going to be 2 different ways you can design the exterior of the new Leafy Cottage house that we got in the premium shop this week. I absolutely love this house skin. As soon as I saw it in the trailer I was like, I need this. It reminds me so much of like a little hobbit house that you'd see in a forest somewhere, but I wanted to do 2 different designs for this so that you kind of could see 2 different ways to design it. Now a lot of the way I kind of styled it and the layout of it was similar, but in terms of the actual kind of like trees and foliage and items I used, I did try to change it up a bit to give them 2 very different vibes. But because this house kind of could fit in lots of different biomes, I wanted to try it out. Now one of the biomes that I did think this actually would work well in, but I didn't include in the video, would be the Glade of Trust. So at some point I may do like a little mini video showing that if people did want to see, but for this video I just included a build in the jungle in Eternity Isle, as well as the Forest of Valor in our main valley. Now when I do a proper setup for this house of where I'm going to have it, I'm probably going to have it in either the forest or the glade, but I think most likely the forest, just because I love this little cottage and I think having it in between lots of different like really overgrown fir trees and it being very like covered over is really going to look lovely. But for the build I wanted to show 2 different options in case you weren't sure how you wanted to display this, so let's get started. So as you can see, for the first build we are starting off in the jungle. I just went down to one of these back sections to do the build, just to give you a good idea of how you could use spacing to kind of show it off. So first off I did place in the house and I used some of the natural stone pathway to create just a very like natural, oddly shaped pathway. I like doing these kind of woven pathways because it means they just look like they're really naturally placed there, and you can use a lot of foliage to kind of border the pathway and give it a really nice structure. So I went in and did that, and once I'd done that I started figuring out some of the main trees I wanted to use, just so I could get an idea of where everything would be placed and how I could kind of put in the structures. With this build I did have a couple of ideas of what I wanted to include in it, and so I went in and I placed in some of the jungle trees because obviously they really brightly match the ones on the Leafy Cottage itself. They went for like a very bright green for some reason. I'm not sure why. I feel like it would have made more sense being a bit of a darker green, but either way I did place some of those in. But I also incorporated some darker trees like the swamp trees and things like that to kind of give it a mixed green vibe so it wasn't too overwhelming. And then I started placing in some of the furniture items I knew I wanted to use in here. Now for this build, a lot of the furniture I use is actually craftable. I don't use very many kind of like Scrooge or premium items or Star Path items or anything like that. A lot of it is craftable, so if you see something and you're not sure which one it is, do let me know down below and I'm more than happy to kind of let you know what is easier to get than others. But I think a majority of what I use in here pretty much was all craftables, so they are accessible in the base game. There may be some couple DLC craftables in here, but I think it was majority base game, so they are easily accessible to anyone with the base game. You just obviously need the resources to craft them. But once I kind of had crafted all those up, I then started placing them around and figuring out the layout. Now in this build I knew I wanted to include like a little farm area. I wanted to do like a really cute little farming setup, and I also wanted to include a lot of kind of like bigger structures that were craftable, like wells and things like that, just to give it this really nice rustic look. So I did start placing all those around and figuring out how the structure of everything would work in the space I had. Now, something I did include that was from the premium shop, but you could swap out for just the base game, is I placed some hedges in some areas around the build. I didn't do it the whole way around as I didn't want it to feel too structured, but I knew the hedges would just bring a really nice kind of like hidden view between the trees. It meant that things didn't look too gappy or strange because there was nothing there. So I only did it on the back left corner behind the house, and I also did it on at the back right corner in the lower section. This obviously wouldn't be as functionable if I was decorating this biome to keep it here. I obviously wouldn't block entrances and exits with the hedges. However, for this, it just worked really well to kind of showcase how you can use these hedges to kind of block up a build and give it a bit more structure, but not really contain it too much, because if the hedges had gone the whole way around this build, it definitely would have made it feel a little bit different, and the vibe wouldn't have been as like kind of natural and spontaneous. I wanted the hedges to feel like they were just very overgrown spots in the biome and it give it a little bit more structure. And once I'd done that, I went in and placed in some rocks and some foliage and things like that and figured out how everything was going to link together. Now for foliage in here, I mainly went with some like bright greens and things like that. So I used a variety of the base game bushes in more of the brighter colours, so like the Plaza, the Peaceful Meadow and the Dazzle Beach kind of variants, just so it had a really nice bright colour scheme, and obviously used some of the beach grass and meadow grass to give it this really nice texture in here, because the jungle floor the grass isn't too long, so adding these in, it just made it look a little bit more overgrown and a little bit more rural. In terms of Eternity Isle foliage, I used a variety of them. I did start off with just like the bright greens and a couple of like jungly pieces hidden here and there, but I do go in later and add in a couple of the colourful ones just to give it a bit more of a kind of like wild vibe and make it seem a little bit more mystical. So I do go in and do that later, but to start off with, I did start off with the greens, and I kind of bordered along the pathway and bordered around the edge of the build itself, and then as I kind of figure out the structure, I can then go in and figure out where I want to add things and change things up. Now, despite this build being in the jungle, I obviously still wanted to give it this really nice mystical vibe, as I was saying, so I did add in some of the kind of like stranger plants and things like that to really give it that feel, and then the colourful ones I add in later obviously add to this. And then after that, I went in and dug in some holes in the right section of like the front garden area, as this is where I wanted to create like a little mini farm. I'd obviously placed out the tool rack and the table and all the items around to kind of fit with that theme, but I did go in and dig those in, and obviously by the end of the build I have planted some plants in there and kind of done it. Now, in the ideal world, I was like, oh, I'd love to make this like a flower garden, but because of the way the flowers are in the game, you can't make like the dug holes and then plant flower bushes in or anything like that at the moment. So I felt like instead of doing that, I will just go in and do like a normal crop farm, and it actually looked really cute by the end. And then after that, I sort of finished up the rest of the foliage, figured out how to kind of border everything properly by adding a couple of other trees, and it kind of rounded up how the rest of the build looked. So this is the final build. As you can see, I've used some of the craftable lanterns at the front just to give it this really nice warm light. Everything in here is very overgrown, and there is the pops of colour in between all of the green. On the left hand side we have the craftable well and the outhouse with some barrels and hay bales and things like that to make it seem very rustic. I used a lot of plant pots around here, which are again craftable, to bring it that kind of cozy feel as if someone really lives here, as well as the yellow Wally bike from Scrooge's shop. And then on the right we obviously have our little mini farm. I decided to plant corn in here as it just really reminds me of a classic farm setup you'd see in other kind of games of similar style. Once I had done that build, I then headed over to the Forest of Valor, and as you can see, placed the Leafy Cottage over in this back section when you first go up from the plaza, and added some of the leaf strewn unbordered pathway into here. This I did in the exact same style of just kind of weaving it about, giving it this really kind of natural structure. And I kind of had a plan in here. I didn't want to do a farm kind of setup again, just because I didn't want it to be too repetitive, but something I will say that would be really cute with this house, or would have worked really well, is a little like pumpkin patch or some more kind of like rustic plants. So you could always do some potatoes, some carrots, some onions, things that are seen as more kind of like hearty food. That would be really, really nice to fit the kind of cottagecore theme in here. Or again, obviously classic would be pumpkins. Pumpkins always work really well in this game to give it that kind of feel. But I decided not to do that, but that is just a tip if anyone wanted to do that. And then I went around the house and I added in a bunch of trees. Now obviously in here I wanted it to have more of a forest style, so I wanted to use a lot of fir trees and some of the Ancients Landing trees, but I did still include a couple of the jungle trees, just so that the kind of way that the colour of the roof of the house looks didn't look too out of place. I knew if I didn't include any jungle trees in here it would look really odd, because it would stand out kind of like a sore thumb in between all of these different trees. So I added a couple of those to kind of continue that nice green theme, but then I added a bunch of other trees to kind of tile together and give it a really nice woodland look. The fir trees are perfect for this. And after that I went in and added foliage first, which is not like me, but in this build I knew foliage would be such a big part of it because it is such a like hidden away section in a forest. I wanted it to feel like someone would stumble upon this house in the middle of nowhere and kind of discover it. So I went in with foliage first. For this one, as you can see, I use a lot more of the darker bushes. So I used a lot of the forest ones, the glade ones, and obviously a couple of the peaceful meadow ones just to break it up a little bit. And I also added some of the sunlit plateau ones, which are these like beautiful orange and red colours, because I wanted it to obviously feel a lot more autumnal in here. I wanted it to feel a little bit like somewhere you stumble upon in the autumn time. So that was kind of the theme of what I went for in here. So using those really, really brought that together. And once I'd placed in those main bushes, as well as some of the berry bushes that we get in the game, I then went in and started placing in the furniture. Now, as I said at the start, a lot of the furniture in this one is very, very similar to the other build. I used a lot of the craftable items. I kept it very consistent with that. So for those of you who obviously don't have a lot from Scrooge's or anything like that, this is completely accessible once you get those resources together. A lot of them don't take too much to be able to craft them. I kind of wanted to stick to ones that are a little bit more simple to do. So popping those in obviously just was able to kind of get all that piece together and start figuring out the layout around everything I'd already created. Once I placed in majority of the furniture, I then also went in and added some of the other items that may not have been in the previous build. So I added actually more flower pots this time around, and also the orange like bouquet of flowers you get in the barrel, and things that just fit more of an autumnal theme as opposed to the previous build with this house. And I also kind of figured out how to kind of hide things in the back of the forest rather than be at the forefront. I wanted them to kind of be hidden and tucked away as if you're discovering them for the first time. So I used things like the craftable wooden carts and the hay barrels, but I also included a lot of pumpkins in here. As I said before, having a pumpkin patch in here would also look amazing, but as I didn't want to do another kind of farm area in this build, I actually added pumpkins from Scrooge's into the build just to give it that same nice autumnal vibe and as an alternative to doing a farm. So if you weren't interested in doing a farm, they are a great way to do that. You can also use the actual pumpkin food that you harvest in the game as a decoration. I didn't choose to do that, but that would also be a really good tip for anyone looking to do that. And then I also included a little campfire in here with just some logs around the edge. People would sit and hang out at and kind of have a snack, and it just fit again with the really nice autumnal fall theme in here. In here, rather than using the brighter kind of like beech or meadow grass, I mainly used a lot of the Forest of Valor bracken. Obviously this is a lot more dense and a lot of a darker green colour, and I did break that up with a couple of bits of meadow grass as they are that more darker green, just to fit with the flooring in here and also give it a much kind of like deeper, more rural vibe than the previous build. And then I went in with a bunch of rocks and other kind of items to border that pathway to make it have a little bit more structure, but also look a little bit more kind of eclectic and unlooked after. Even though you can tell someone obviously lives here, it is a little bit more kind of random and has a bit more variety of things going on, as if someone does live here but they're not necessarily keeping up with things as much as someone would as if they were in the previous build. To finish up the build, I just added in some extra kind of foliage around in the background just to border it a little bit more. Obviously if I was doing this as a proper build in my valley, I would have it kind of leading onto another section, but just for the purpose of the build I wanted to include more of that before I finished up. This is the final build. Again, I've used the exact same lanterns that are craftable. They work perfectly in here as well, and we have this really beautiful kind of autumnal forest setup. I really love how this turned out. On the left you obviously have the little bench to sit on with some books and a guitar where people can obviously sit and hang out. The inclusion of the berry bushes in here work perfectly to just make it seem that much more rural and as though you would kind of stumble in a forest and find berries and things like that. Obviously in front of the house we have the campfire as well as lots of barrels and things like we did in the previous one, and then we have the rustic clock tower on the right to tie it all together. So here are some shots of the final build. I'll start off by showing the kind of like jungle, more brighter themed one. This one would also work perfectly, I feel like, in your meadow or somewhere that's a bit more of a brighter theme, like the meadow or the plaza, or again in the jungle. I feel like this just has that kind of vibe that I think this house is very versatile and could work in a lot of different biomes. And then we move on to the forest one. Again, this could be perfect in the forest or the glade or just a darker biome. I feel like it just looks so lovely in here to make it seem like it's quite abandoned and quite rural, and I just love how both of these turned out. So those are the final builds. I hope you guys enjoyed and it gave you a bit of inspiration for two different ways you could design it. Obviously I tend to do builds that fit my kind of aesthetic or how I would display it in my valley, but I wanted to do an alternative that showed you kind of different options of how to use the house in different biomes. Obviously not everyone is going to want to put this house in the forest or in the glade. They might want to put it in a brighter biome like their meadow or their plaza, or even in the jungle. So I wanted to give you kind of an alternative option of things you can use to kind of integrate it and make it versatile, because out of all the house skins we have, this one is very, very versatile. Despite the fact that it does look kind of rustic, it really would work well in a lot of different places. So I hope you guys did enjoy. If you do want to see anything in particular on the channel, please do let me know down below. I have like kind of a collection list of all the things that people have suggested, or like my own ideas that are coming up. So they are in the works and they are coming. Thank you so much for all the support though on the channel. It means so much to me. Make sure you like and subscribe, as it really helps me out, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.